Headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the National Air and Space Intelligence Center is the DoD's primary source for foreign air and space threat analysis. NASIC is the Air Force's Service Intelligence Center, the nation's Air and Space Intelligence Center, and an operational wing in the Air Force ISR enterprise. Its mission is to discover and characterize air, space, missile, and cyber threats to enable full-spectrum multi-domain operations, drive weapon system acquisition, and inform national defense policy. Next up is a panel on digital engineering and the art of the possible.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for this opportunity to moderate an exceptional panel that I'll get to in just a second. For those of you who don't know me, Colonel Mike Phillips. I'm the AFMC A6, although Herwick will call me out and say I'm the Deputy A36, but for the cyber operators in the room, I think A6 is probably a little bit easier to get under. You don't want to hear about me, you want to hear about the panel members, so that's what we're going to get to. You know, just a few miles down the road, a pair of brothers achieved the art of the impossible back in 1904, engineering, designing, constructing, and actually flying an aircraft. Now, I know there are some of you out there, the history buffs, are going to say 1904. Hey, Otter, it's 1903, but you're in the greater Miami Valley region right now. Kitty Hawk was nice, and they flew long and straight for a little while, but back here was the Wright Flyer 2, folks. The Wright Flyer 2 really encompassed digital engineering. They were able to make turns in the air, do circles, 105 flights totaling 49 minutes. And unlike the effort in North Carolina, this aircraft helped lead the way towards being able to actually pilot an aircraft, not just go from point to point. Figure eights, a single flight that lasted 39 minutes, covering 24 miles, and all of it was done without a computer. So you fast forward just a few years later, nearby McCook Field, the precursor to the Air Force Research Lab. Over the next century, rapid innovation was fueled by cutting-edge technology, and joined with our partners at the Air Force Institute of Technology, our uniformed and non-uniformed airmen continue to push the envelope in support of our nation's defense. So while the Wright brothers used a slide rule and blacksmith tools and sewing machines, our modern cyber operators are putting to use 3D modeling, machine learning, AI, in order to continue to push the envelope. We've designed things like hypersonic aircraft for air and space. Today, I'm joined by three experts in digital engineering to help us chart a course in the realm of what's possible. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some of the introductions here. So Dr. James Sumter is a senior scientist and program manager for Weapon 1 and digital engineering lead at the Air Force Research Lab's Munitions Directorate, Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. So James, wave your hand. There you go, on the left. He's over 20 years of experience leading technology teams and companies and provides strategic development and technical expertise in digital engineering, modeling, and simulation, machine learning, data analytics, and software development. Mr. John Palvin is the Director for Cybersecurity for Manufacturing Times Digital, or MXD. John? Right there in the middle. You can see he's got his corporate logo going right there. Via partnerships with the DoD, MXD equips U.S. factories with digital tools, cybersecurity, and workforce expertise. Prior to MXD, John was the manager of manufacturing cybersecurity architecture for Abbott Laboratories. And then finally, I've got Jordan Garrett. He's the digital twin and edge solutions lead for Dell Technologies. I think you can probably guess which one Jordan is right there. In his role, he worked with customers and partners across the aerospace and defense, federal, state, local education sectors to enable transformational solutions at scale. I've got a lot more in each one of these gentlemen, but instead of me talking about it, what I want to do is give them each a minute to just briefly talk about their expertise and what it brings to this panel, and then we're going to get into some questions. We do have a hard stop, so that's why I'm kind of rushing through this intro part. But first, we'll go with James Sumter. Dr. Sumter, over to you for a minute.
Thank you, sir. Happy to be with you today. So, as was said a little bit in the introduction, I'm the program manager for Weapon 1, and this is a program in the Air Force Research Lab's Munitions Directorate to fully investigate the art of the possible and the application of digital engineering across the life cycle of weapon systems. So we're starting looking at how best to build in digital engineering practices. And we like to include with that actually Dr. Roper's digital trinity, digital, agile, open aspects, and how to build those things in, starting from the concept phase with science and technology and research and development, and doing that in such a way to be mindful of all of the later aspects of the life cycle, post-production and acquisition when the warfighter needs to operate those weapon systems and how to maximize the effects and capabilities of those weapon systems. So we're looking out across the entire life cycle, and we think that that's a really important perspective, is to take that holistic approach as we try to lay out the processes, methodologies, and tools that are needed to fully realize digital engineering applied to the development of these weapon systems.
Thank you. So, John, why don't you go ahead and take it from there?
Yeah, you bet. So, John Palvin's Director of Cybersecurity for MXD. MXD is a public-private partnership with the Department of Defense. We were initially funded back in the Obama administration under the America Makes program, focused on digital manufacturing and the digital thread inside of manufacturing. In 2019, we received additional funding through the DoD to be the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing for the Department of Defense. So inside of that mission, we are covering awareness and training and making so in our 10,000 manufacturers awareness campaign, trying to get out and talk to 10,000 different manufacturers in the defense industrial base and make them aware of cybersecurity and how to improve their cybersecurity. We have tools and services where we are standing up a marketplace to make it simpler to purchase the tools and services required for your cybersecurity needs in our MXD Cyber Marketplace. Then we're also focused on workforce development. So we have an excellent program through MXD Learn to upskill, reskill, and train the future workforce in manufacturing, both for digital technologies, everything inside of manufacturing, and also, of course, including the cybersecurity. We understand the cybersecurity skills gap. We've all talked about it a lot. This is a big initiative to help close that skills gap.
Thank you. And Jordan, last but not least, good to see you again. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As we look at digital transformations, how they're accelerating, maybe that's been precipitated by COVID, but we look at a bunch of ideas that have existed in the industry, in the domain for quite some time. When you look at digital thread, digital twin, those ideas and how they tie into digital engineering, well, the increased discussion in the market right now about those things is a function mainly of the underlying technologies that enable them. So, some 30 years ago, we were talking about these ideas, but now with the proliferation of IoT, cloud technologies, advanced compute capabilities, and advanced forms of storage, we now can see the potential outcomes where we're rapidly building complex systems, rarely having to leverage the physical world for testing, rapidly iterate upon them, and help them evolve. I think everybody agrees that the goal is how do we get our platforms to be more like your iPhone, where you can fundamentally transform it with a new operating system or new features. And then to do that, Dell is very much of the mind that the architectures and solutions that got us to where we are not the solutions and architectures that will get us to where we need to go. So we are very focused in the digital twin space, digital engineering space. What are those changes that need to be made to the architectures and solutions to support that? How do we help organizations like the U.S. Air Force, DoD, not really have to worry about all those underlying technological problems and focus more on their domain expertise and the problems they're trying to solve, and how they're doing that through modeling both the physical world and tying that into, ground lines of communications and their models of how things are supported in an operational environment, modeling the threat environment, and really instantiating that OODA loop that we all know so well and that warfighters operate by either intuitively or on purpose. How do we instantiate that as an organizational capability to better understand our world, develop capabilities, and then push that into execution and operations faster than our competitors?
Execution and operations, the rapid development piece, and you're dialed in today to the mecca of Air Force acquisitions, if you will. Most of the Air Force budget is executed right here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The concept of digital modernization is contingent on the willingness of those program managers to adapt and grow with emerging technologies that you all have mentioned today. This is often a hurdle, given the numerous legacy systems that the DoD is responsible for managing. What do you feel is the best way to implement a digital strategy that not only accounts for these legacy systems and accommodates for the antiquated backbone, but also gains the support of those program managers who are oftentimes fearful of mission creep or funding or things of that nature. So Dr. Sumter, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I think that there are a lot of really big challenges in ushering in this digital transformation across the forces. And I think one of the things that I wrangle with almost on a day-to-day basis is trying to strike that very careful balance between the reality that we need strong leadership to be a proponent of the digital transformation and what that entails, standing up the infrastructure and the tools, making those available to the workforce, and training them, of course, hand in hand to gain that cultural acceptance. So we need that strong leadership, but the careful, delicate part of this is the balance and not being overly prescriptive right now in some of the processes and methodologies that are around standing these capabilities up. And that's for a couple of different reasons. One of them, there's no actual written recipe or cookbook just yet for how to fully implement digital engineering across the life cycle of our weapon systems. So there are a lot of discovery efforts that are still underway, research efforts underway. And I would say even any program, major program that's implementing digital engineering would tell you that they've learned a lot in their journey and what they've done, and there's still a lot to learn. So we have to be careful about being prescriptive there and recognize that there are a lot of lessons learned still to be gained in going through this process. We also don't have fully in place all of the infrastructure and tools that we really need to implement a digital transformation. So, it's perhaps a little bit less attractive, exciting part of the journey, but we really need better infrastructure and tools across the enterprise to enable the digital transformation to happen so that we can get to the really exciting work, I think, in terms of leveraging emerging technologies and AI, ML, and doing the most decision making that we can based on good information and the data that we collect by having this data fabric that underlies the digital foundation. So I think that delicate balance there, we need the strong leadership. It's somewhat of a cliche, but the frozen middle is a reality. And so that strong leadership needs to be there and continue to prompt the middle managers. I know you mentioned in in this particular question, getting the program manager specifically, and I'm a program manager. Of course, I'm biased since I'm leading a digital transformation program. But I find good acceptance with program managers. They want to do it, but they don't have the resources set aside with their budgets to stand these capabilities up. So if we want this kind of a transformation to happen, we have to be willing to invest in it across the DoD. It doesn't come for free, and I think you'll find that in the private sector and industry as well. It takes a dedicated manpower, resources, and funding to stand these kinds of capabilities up and make them available. And then the last point I would like to make is that harkens back to not being prescriptive. I see a lot of efforts in this natural progression or journey towards digital transformation. They are taking some of the good tenets of digital engineering, which we often talk about as being a model-based approach instead of a document-centric approach. But they're taking their documents and almost copying and pasting them into modeling tools. And that's okay as a first step to kind of wrap your head around the modeling tools, model-based systems engineering tools, and so forth. But we have to be careful there because if we just map our documents directly into the models, we're not going to realize the full potential of digital engineering and how it can transform our actual processes. So we're tending to take a lot of our current processes and just map them over into the digital realm and say, well, that's great. We're now doing digital engineering. Here's our model-based approach. It's in a model, but we really haven't done very much. We may have made the data more accessible and leverageable, which is fantastic, but we're not thinking out of the box enough and being creative and imaginative enough to think about how digital engineering truly can disrupt and transform a lot of the processes that we've been using in the military for decades. And that's where the potential is going to come from. And I think that's where we're going to bring in some of the laggards, if you will. If you look at a traditional tech innovation curve, You have certain early adopters and so forth, and then you go through the major adopters, but you always have those laggards. And until they see the really amazing potential and payback, and see that most everyone else has bought into the digital transformation and the change in those processes, we're not going to be able to fully win everyone over and fully optimize and realize all the benefits of doing the digital transformation.
So you mentioned prescriptive a lot, and John, from your background, cybersecurity, that almost conflicts a little bit. So I'm interested in your thoughts on how, as Dr. Sumter's saying, let's get less prescriptive. How do we maintain that cybersecurity aspect as we continue to modernize?
Yeah, right. So you've got to start out, and unfortunately in cybersecurity we are a little bit more prescriptive of rules that need to be followed, standards that need to be gone against. However, you can still have an agile approach inside of cybersecurity, and what I would urge people to do is look at their goals. Your goal isn't to digitize, right? Your goal isn't cybersecurity. Your goal is to be able to ship product quickly and accurately at the highest profit margin you can have, right? That's the goal, not digital, not cybersecurity. So when you keep your goal in mind and you start thinking about cybersecurity, your investments now will be on that resilience and keeping your production line up and running, and not so much around compliance and not so much around cybersecurity specific needs. So I'd encourage you in that digital transformation, in your cybersecurity, as you go through there, you cannot do digital without cybersecurity. That's why the DoD picked the digital thread of manufacturing, the digital institution, to cover cybersecurity. You're generating data, you're introducing new vulnerabilities. So you have to deal with cybersecurity from the start. It can't be an afterthought. It can't be something you get to in the future. So I encourage you to keep all that in mind as you're going through that journey and starting that digital journey that you're going to be going through.
Awesome. Yeah, so the baked in concept we talk about a lot. So Jordan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think globally, we really have to think, one, about the cultural aspect. And then when we think that, okay, cultures can eat strategy and innovation all day long. They typically don't want to change. They want to keep what they know. And then so we have to think about culture in the context of leadership. So leaders are there to facilitate and manage the change of an organization. And they need to set the conditions for those people that are going to execute the change to be successful. So how do they get down into those friction points and unlock that so folks like Dr. Sumter can do what they need to do, so that your builders can build? And the great irony here, I think, and I'm a former Army officer and infantryman by trade, we at the same time in the military are both the most innovative organization in the world and the most ossified bureaucratic organization in the world. And the way that we operate down at the tactical level in instances where there's existential crisis, we're rapidly iterating and responding to an ever morphing threat environment and an enemy who's doing the same thing at the same time. And our power has always been our ability to allow that to happen at low levels, quickly identify what's working, and then create that at an immense scale given the industrial power of the United States. And so if you think about the hedgerows in Normandy, some commander probably walked up and said, what is that on the front of that tank? And it's like, oh, sir, Private Johnson did this. And he fashioned it, and we're able to bust through those things. And then it just takes that to proliferate it up the chain and then marshal the resources to put that on every tank and facilitate the breakout. So, what was executed there is not any different than what we need to do on an organizational day-to-day basis. We just now can do it at such rapidity given the technologies that we have in hand. And with the ever-evolving proliferation of simulations and the ability to leverage the virtual world to do that, we can rapidly increase the speed at which we can evaluate those concepts, move them down from conceptual levels down to design levels, and really get to where our ideas and our platforms will just exist in kind of the omniverse or whatever you might want to call it, and they will only manifest when we need to build them for a given threat or operation or mission.
So, Jordan, I want to stay with you for a minute because you probably can't see the crowd, but when you started talking about being mired in bureaucracy, the heads were all nodding north-south. So they're agreeing with you from that perspective. But you've mentioned leadership, and Dr. Sumter mentioned it as well. And you heard Ms. Knassenberger this morning talk about General Brown and his push to accelerate change or lose. And I think that's really what you guys are all getting after right now. So as we continue to face the near-peer adversaries, what can digital modernization do to ensure we accelerate and change and avoid losing in the great power competition? So Jordan, actually, let's continue with you at that point.
Yeah, it's, to James's point about we can't merely just take what we're doing now and put it into a software program and say we've executed a digital transformation. That is not a transformation, and we will find that we will have more problems and inefficiencies, or at least at a bare minimum, the existing problems and inefficiencies, if we just try to take something done in the real world, write a software program to do it, and then call it a day. We really do need to transform. So once you put all of this information into technology, into your IT infrastructure, architectures, and solutions and applications, don't merely adopt the old industrial process and program management techniques. Think about how you can transform those as well. And that's what the attempt to adopt Agile or DevSecOps has been. How do we move from the way we built things, the way Rockefeller and Ford defined it for us in terms of Gantt charts and these prescriptive, deterministic problem-solving processes, and then move that into something that's agile, something that allows you to quickly define a problem, form a hypothesis to solve it, and iterate. And to do that, you need to figure out the data management piece, figure out the security piece, be able to unlock that data across an organization, let whoever needs to get to it and should be able to get to it as quickly as possible so that they can execute their piece of the pie. And then you have to tie it in and understand how that's going to impact someone else within the value chain, within the platform, within the organization. And if you can leverage automation and all these other different technologies that we're talking about to do that, then you can transform and get to where we can. And that's a very kind of internal business problem process discussion. But if we can execute that internally, that's what's going to give us the ability to rapidly respond to, understand our near-peer adversaries and respond to them, and hopefully put them at positions of disadvantage where they're responding to us.
So, James, take it to the next level for us. How is AFRL getting after General Brown's directive?
Yeah, so great comments, Jordan, as usual. And just going back kind of to General Brown's quote that's oft used there, and like many great quotes, it says a lot with just a few words. And I want to focus on the change part. There's two things here. One, the one thing we know, I think, about the future is the level of uncertainty is going up in terms of what our adversaries may bring to the fight. And we have to have the ability to change, to be flexible, to adapt, and to meet whatever lies in that uncertain realm. So there's one aspect or layer of change there embedded in that comment. To be able to do that, we actually have to change. We have to disrupt ourselves. And so I think that's what the digital transformation is about, is working those changes and being mindful, of course, along the way with cybersecurity and so forth. We're certainly baking that into everything that we do. And there's a natural progression forward as to how we can responsibly move ahead with doing our day-to-day work. We can't just try untested, possibly unsecure methodologies and so forth overnight, but we have to leave ourselves open to the prospect to be receptive, imaginative possibilities of what we can do in the future and how we can do it better, so that we enable ourselves to be adaptive, um, kind of having a real change across the enterprise, and then being able to have that future force that can adapt and change as is needed rapidly to whatever the adversary brings. One tag on to that is, I think that it's also important that we project our capability to adapt in a really powerful way, and that's going to be actually one of the main deterrents in the future for us. Is if our adversaries see the increase in efficiencies with which we can realize new concepts, new capabilities, new effects, if we can accelerate those timelines and start bringing those capabilities to the field faster, I think that sends a huge signal, and it's a tremendous deterrent for us. And we need to show that we have that agility across our forces and domains.
Should we talk about the magnitude of change that has to happen? This panel is about digital transformation and the art of the possible. So that comes with risk. So John, from your perspective, from a cybersecurity piece, in order to change, what are those game changers that are out there that is going to help us get after the things that Jordan and James are talking about, but continue to meet the cybersecurity piece that you're so passionate about?
You know, honestly, it's a lot of basic cyber hygiene that folks need to start doing. We read a lot in the news, and it's sensationalized around nation state nation state level threat actors, nation state level attackers. That's not most threats, right? Most threats are very simple, drive by, simple, and that's what's taking down manufacturing right now. We're not dealing with nation state threats for the most part. We're dealing with simple things that can be brought back. And everyone else kind of referenced other military. I'm going to pull back from my Coast Guard days and pull out the Coast Guard model of Semper Paratus, which is always ready. And I think that's what this digital threat is. And I think that's also what cybersecurity is it's always ready. You're always ready to deal with a threat. You're always ready to recover systems when you need to, and you understand how to do it. You're always ready to be measuring the success of your programs. And with digital manufacturing, you're always ready to be making what needs to be made the way it needs to be made. And I think digital manufacturing and Coast Guard's Semper Paratus really hold hands very nicely. And I think a lot of folks in the military, especially, most of you probably aren't Coast Guard. We're the smallest service, but the military preaches always ready to everyone. You're always ready to adapt to missions, to overcome. You give your leaders the ability to change orders when they need to in the field when things are going on. You talked about the hedgerow bashers on the tanks where people are ready to innovate. That all exists in the field today. All those resources, innovative engineers are at every factory all over, and digital lets you take advantage of all of them. So.
Thanks. So Jordan, what are the game changers? What do you see as the three biggest game changers that we're going to see to help us achieve this digital modernization?
I think it first will be the impact of simulations at both abstract levels as well as the physical world. Humans are forming models based on observations of the world and trying to come up with a good model that's good enough to get done what they need to do, whether that's the design of a system or an engine or a new type of wing, or it's a credit model for financial services, or it's a threat model for cybersecurity, or our doctrinal models and understandings of the world and how we fight, in the military perspective. So how can we better leverage simulations to test those when we know that, one, real world testing is so costly and inefficient, and then two, the ultimate things that we have to test, we never really want to test. We never really want to test how effective our bombs are, how our doctrine is going to help us win the next war. So I think simulations will be a big part of that. The next part is, I would say, the confluence of data management and connectivity to the edge. So to test those models, you need real world data, because otherwise it's just an assumption. And there's a huge danger in working based on something just done in the theoretical space, whether that's in your head or that's in a simulation. It has to be tested with real world data from the real world. So I think that calls into affect the need for connecting into the data so that you can get the right data at the right time at the right place to be able to test these ideas. And then again, I'll turn it over to John. I mean, security embedded throughout. Decision makers, whether you've never touched a line of code in your life, you need to understand the fundamentals and the concepts that go into protecting all of this stuff. And you need to understand it also in the context of risk. We don't make, we shouldn't be making decisions accepting zero risk whatsoever, because what that tells me is you don't understand risk, because there's never zero risk. So you need to kind of think more, if you've seen that documentary with Warren Buffett, where he says, I know with a 30% probability that if I swing at pitches in this area, I'm going to get a hit. If I do that right, I'm going to be a Hall of Famer. So, that's what risk-weighted decision-making or expected value decision-making is. So how do you train that into the force better than we already have it today to be able to guide these efforts?
Awesome. So James, as somebody who does test for a living and lives with risk, and actually is probably somebody who welcomes risk on a daily basis, anything you want to add from a game changer perspective? What are you looking forward to the most?
Great list, Jordan. I have to say I concur with those three major areas. On the risk front, absolutely, there's never zero risk. And I think that is a key aspect to what we're doing, is understanding that there's risk there with what we're creating, whether you're talking about the digital thread, the digital twins, the data fabric and data management piece. We're creating really new targets for our adversaries, and there are going to be new vulnerabilities around those targets in the cyber realm, especially. That we have to be mindful of, and so I think there's huge risk in that area, and I don't think that our traditional approach with STIGs and RMF overlays and so forth are going to patch or cover all of those vulnerabilities in such a way that allows us to enable or realize the transformation. So one of the things that I see sometimes internally is this sense that we're special in the DoD, and oftentimes we know best, and we need to roll our own solution. And a big change, a paradigm that I think's happened over the last 2 to 3 decades is in many of these areas of technology, industry has surpassed the DoD. There's many areas where we don't have the manpower and the resources, and even the expertise to really lead in a number of these areas. And it behooves us to leverage what's happening in industry and recognize that a lot of the big industry players have worked out incredibly good schemes, if you will, for cybersecurity around their data and so forth. And we need to look at those things, leverage the investments, the billions and billions of dollars that they're making every year. Look at those, leverage those, bring those into the DoD, and bring a lot of those best practices from industry into how we're doing things in a new, better, more modern way that will work hand in hand with all of the digital transformation and data management practices that we're trying to put into place. So I would look at managing risk internally, but also to look out at the world and see how the world are managing some of the same challenges.
So game changers aren't always welcome. But sometimes they're the kick in the pants that we need. So, and today's a perfect example of it. So, one of the game changers that I think really surprised a lot of us over the past 2 years was the pandemic and our unpreparedness, if you will, for being able to respond to it in a form such as what we're doing now. It took a while, and you mentioned industry, and you mentioned industry best practices, and the government was a little slow to pick up on some of these best practices, but a lot of them were needed, and I think a lot of them have helped us change the paradigm in which the way the supervisors are interacting with their subordinates, the way that we're meeting remotely and bringing folks in from all over the world. It was great. Ms. Knossenberger is extremely busy at the SAF CIO level, but to have a chance for her to dial in and be a part of this. I wasn't able to make it yesterday, but I had the forum pulled up on my computer at my office while I was still getting the day job done over there. So John, I'm going to start with you. Is what is the biggest change that you saw as a result of the global pandemic? What do you think is here to stay, and how can we take advantage of it?
The thing that I'm encouraged of most, and especially as I think about cybersecurity, the challenge of hiring people and then requiring them all to be in a common office located next to each other. Now I can hire talent all over the country, potentially all over the world if I'm doing worldwide work. I'm not currently, but I have this ability now to recruit out of all parts of America. And I hope the military looks at this, and where you don't have to be physically, where the physical location isn't super important to you, make the service members' lives easier and don't move them anymore. Right? Let them establish a home base. And I think this is going to be the biggest that we've learned from this is the digital transformation, remote workers, business still happened. Everything still worked. Business got done. Missions were completed. So this drawing people back into an office, I think we're going to run away from it eventually, and we're going to become a more distributed workforce. And I'm excited for getting to live where I want to live instead of getting to live next to my office. And I think we can't hold that floodgate back. So the digital transformation for workers it's happening, and you can't stop it.
We had getting folks into the labs from a HPCon perspective and not allowing folks to come into base. How has AFRL gotten after that digital transformation as a result of some of these changes?
Okay, I missed or my audio cut out for the very first part of your question.
Sorry about that. So what I'm getting at is he mentions the paradigm shift and not having to have the folks in the offices anymore. And I saw it firsthand here at Wright Pat with AFRL headquarters. And the need to keep the labs running and things of that nature. How has AFRL gotten after that digital transformation, that modernization, in order to continue to execute its mission in light of the pandemic?
Absolutely. So, I think hand in hand across the Air Force and I'm sure the other services, this was obviously a lot of tragedy around the pandemic, but for us, it was a forcing function. And I think it was absolutely heartening to see how, in many respects, we had to transform how we worked to continue to get the job done. And we rose to the challenge. And many fine folks across the Air Force stood up capabilities like virtual desktop interfaces, the work that went into strengthening the capabilities behind our collaboration tools and the willingness across the workforce to leverage and use those tools where pre-pandemic, I think you would have had a really tough sell in getting the adoption of the use of some of these tools and the acceptance of these things. So it's absolutely been heartening for me, and I think it bodes well for the future of digital transformation across the forces and how we've embraced leveraging tools in the virtual realm to get the job done. I know that in our program, I believe that we actually made more progress faster in our digital transformation efforts around Weapon 1 and the Munitions Directorate because we were teleworking. Honestly, I have better infrastructure elsewhere than specifically on base, and standing a lot of these early capabilities up and understanding how they work together and even building them securely can actually be done and experimented with first in an unclassified or unsecure or not unsecured, unclassified type environment. So we're of course still working at a certain level of security around what we're doing. And you're not going to get around the need to have face-to-face meetings and physical security around many of your systems. And so there will always be that need to be on base or in secure facilities to get certain work done. But I think that the future will be a hybrid mix, and hopefully our leaders recognize the great progress that we made, and will enable us to have a little bit more flexible hybrid work environment going forward into the future. And I think we'll reap benefits from that across the forces.
Thanks. So I know we've got a hard stop because you guys have got a meeting with General Pringle. So Jordan, I'm going to turn it over to you for some closing comments, and we'll work our way back down the line.
Yeah. Through both of the comments of John James, I think it's important to keep an open mind and look out to other domains to see how they're seeking to solve these problems. I mean, if we look in the commercial environment, as folks are trying to transform digitally, the difference between those companies that are valued at obscene multiples relative to our traditional industries that have been around for decades, you look at those companies and they have a different approach to technology. Technology is not a cost center to them. It's not something to be managed, where efficiency and lowest amount of cost is the driving factor. Technology is a place where they put ideas, resources, and capital to generate return. And to get to a culture that understands that, you now need your operative decision makers, whether that's a pilot, whether that's an infantry officer or a ship captain, to understand how they can take their resources, apply that to technology to create better outcomes for what it is that their mission is. And that's going to require folks to step out of their comfort zones. But if we look at it again, it's not, it was not the engineer that built the tank that figured out how to use it. Churchill saw it and said, whoa, this could be a game changer. Then later, folks like Guderian and Patton, they figured out how to employ it. Think about the way we seem to develop platforms now. If we take the Army and said, hey, I'm going to develop a new anti-aircraft gun. And somebody's like, well, what if we, point that horizontal to the ground? It could be an anti-tank gun. If that was the mentality in Germany, the 88 would not be that fearsome tool that was used in two, as we would call them now, domains, both land and air, in a novel way. But right now, I'm not sure that, the regulations and the structure that we have and how that kind of forces some of the thinking lets us think like that. So how do we overcome those cultural challenges? I mean, the technology's there and the bright people who can figure out these problems are there. We've just got to make sure that the institution is cognizant of that. It's providing the benefits that an institution does, figuring things out at scale and helping manage things at scale. But the innovation has to be figured out at the lowest levels. And the resources need to be there to enable folks to do that. So how do we manage that process, kind of in conjunction with our desire to manage large organizations?
Thanks. John, closing comments?
I just, as you're looking at your digital journey, make sure that you're not digitizing a bad process. That just means you're going to get lots of data really quickly about a bad process. So keep your goals in mind. Make sure you're improving your processes as you're going through this. Make sure you're baking in cybersecurity from the start, not trying to do it afterwards. You will fail if you try to do it afterwards. It has to be from day one. And there's lots of resources available for you. There's lots of companies who have gone through this journey. I'll just real quick pitch MXD again. We are funded by the DoD, so we are here to help you. We have a 22,000 square foot factory floor demonstrating digital technologies and demonstrating the art of the possible. So you're able to come into Chicago and take a tour of our factory floor and use what the DoD is paying for. So happy to support people coming out and visiting with us.
Thank you. James, final thoughts?
I just want to tag on to what both Jordan and John have been talking about. I concur with their assessments. And to Jordan's comment about the person that engineered perhaps and built the tank and the figuring out the best use of that. I think one of the major principles or tenets that we're going after with digital transformation is to improve that feedback loop. So how quickly can we get from the commander or the warfighter that knows what their needs are, knows what tools they have, how best to employ those, and where they come up short, where there are gaps, feeding that information rapidly back into a development pipeline where we can, research, develop, and produce an answer to meet those needs as quickly as possible. And so a lot of iterative, rapid feedback loops, I think, which are underpinned by the flow of data and information that has value in the process is really a key tenet of what we're going after, and that will enable that capability of change that we desperately need in the future.
Thank you. You know, gentlemen, my son's an architecture student in Chicago, actually, John, so I might come visit you, take you up on that offer. And I watch him manipulate CAD software and create buildings in a matter of hours that when I was his age 30 years ago would have taken me weeks and months to create, and he can literally change it on the fly. And that reminds me when we talk about digital modernization and the art of the possible. From the point where the Wright brothers flew down the street at Huffman Prairie to the point where Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon was 6 decades. 6 decades. The computing power that we've got on our watch is more powerful than that he had when he had to alter the course and land in the Sea of Tranquility. And it's amazing to me to think about the conversation we had today and what a panel like this will be talking about 6 decades from now. So, gentlemen, I truly appreciate your engagement today and your participation in this panel. To Yvonne and the entire FCA team, thank you. It's because of groups like this and your engagement and your attendance at these conferences that we can continue to push that digital age, that we continue to modernize, that we can talk about the art of the possible and not the impossible. So thank you all. Thank you, gentlemen, for participating today. And Yvonne, I turn it back over to you and your team. I kept you right on time, 10:40, as promised.